WCNC Charlotte. This is Flashpoint, where power and politics collide and the tough questions get asked and answered.
Thanks for joining us here on Flashpoint. I'm Hunter Sáenz, filling in for Ben Thompson. Joining us for today's show, Charlotte City Councilmen Republican Tariq Bokhari and Democrat Larken Egleston. The city of Charlotte has had a mask mandate for a few weeks now, but this week Mecklenburg counties went into effect county-wide. The mandate is for inside public buildings in Mecklenburg County, regardless of vaccination status. CMPD plans to handle the enforcement of this, but at the same time, there's voluntary compliance. That's what's expected, as well as education for those who do not follow it. In most cases, officers will remind people who are not wearing masks inside public spaces that it's now required. Guys, thank you for joining us again. From businesses that you all have talked to, is this something that they want? It obviously has to be better than a shutdown again. Councilman Bokhari, we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, I think most of the people I've talked to, particularly a lot of small business owners, as well as my own personal feeling, is the way this came about was hasty and a little unnecessary. There was a lot of confusion. We were getting all kinds of calls. What does it mean? How do we enforce it? Like, are we expected to, report certain things? So there's a lot of questions. But I think the thing that frustrated most of us was that there was really no transparency as to how this decision-making process came to be. It happened behind closed doors, where then the elected officials came out afterwards and made a variety of different announcements. And I think at the end of the day, there's a lot of us who aren't opposed to mask mandates if they're necessary, but going through that rigorous process of understanding what data they were looking at and then what triggers ultimately might require escalations, those kinds of things are important because it's a slippery slope in going from a mask mandate, which has some impacts on businesses, to a complete lockdown and shutdown like we saw previously, where people are just literally they're not going to make it through another one of those.
Larken, do you think this is something that's needed again here in the city and county?
Yeah, I think Tariq kind of made the point I was going to make, which is that no, they're not excited about the mask mandate because inevitably on any given day, someone's going to come in and be a jerk about being asked to wear a mask, and the business owners don't want to be the mask police. But what they definitely don't want is for us to have to close down again. And so I think that the city's goal and the business's goal is, what can we do? Let's do everything we can short of trying to say people can't sit inside in restaurants, or say that restaurants can only do to-go orders again. I don't know how we'll get through that if we get back to that point. So I think we all want to do anything we can to avoid that. I think masks is one of those things.
It's one thing to put a mask or re-put a mask mandate in to effect, but enforcement and following it is a whole different conversation. You go to grocery stores, you go to some restaurants, now that it's been in effect in the city of Charlotte, and people just still aren't wearing them inside. Are people following the rules where you're going?
I see some of both. I think that part of it is just reminding folks, because we were able for a couple of months to sort of get out of that habit if we were vaccinated. And so part of it is reminding, part of it is education. This is not something we want to send CMPD around chasing folks down for not wearing a mask, obviously. But I think the average person, if the health leaders in our community are telling us that this is something that can help us turn the tide again back in the direction we want it to go, I think most of us will heed that advice and will say, if this is what they're saying can help, then let's try it.
A lot of business owners have told me that it shouldn't be their responsibility to try to enforce this in their place of business. So how should a mask mandate be working? I know that you say you don't want to fine people, you want to go through education, but it's still a rule and people are still supposed to follow those.
I think this is something that is a personal decision that businesses should be making right now, while we should be figuring out what is the maximizing approach for vaccines, and how are we going to future-proof this world that we live in right now for the new normal that exists. I said this a year and a half ago, and I'll say it again now. This is not a passing storm for one weekend. This is something that is more like a series of seasons that we're just going to have to get used to. And it can't be continual government mandates every time in a reactive force. It has to be a data-based, logical approach that is, transparent and in the light of day.
We have heard Gibby Harris, the health director, say that masks are not an end-all be-all, but that they do help reduce the spread of the virus. But I want to move on to something that you got to.
As does the vaccine, which I cannot encourage people strongly enough to go out and get. That's how we move past masks.
Correct. And to that point, Charlotte employees are now getting paid to get the COVID-19 vaccine. City workers who get vaccinated by September 30th, they're going to receive $250. And if at least 75% of the city's workforce is vaccinated by that date, they will receive another $250. Are these incentives going to work, to your point, to get people vaccinated?
What I do think is that if it works and any of our employees get vaccinated because of that, even if it's a small number, then I think it's worth doing, because we know that the impacts this has not only on the health and safety of our employees, the health and safety of the people that they interface with, and many of the city employees are interfacing with the public every single day. But we know that as any of them that get vaccinated, instead of getting the virus, paying them $250 to do that is a lot less costly than them having weeks at a time being out of work, filing insurance claims, things like that. So the cost of these folks that work with us getting sick is much, much higher than the cost of this incentive.
Tariq, I know your Republican colleague on the dais there, Ed Driggs, asked for more information and sounded a bit skeptical to all of this, and for good reason, because it is a lot of money that could possibly be spent here. In your opinion, is there a better use of this money when it comes to also trying to get people vaccinated?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. Like, here's one example is, let's figure out ways to help retool our small businesses or our workforce to exist in a new normal of this kind of post-COVID world we live in. So yeah, giving the people who are not vaccinated now, likely it's not a small amount of money that's like, oh, that's going to teeter me over the edge. There's a lot of people who don't care, or care, but they care like, given the fact that, you know, one of them just recently got FDA approval, right? Things like that. But there are things with risk associated with them. People make decisions, and I'm not trying to throw someone under the bus for saying I'm not going to get the vaccine. I also don't want that to become something where people who will do it don't go do it because of that. So I think we all need to take a breath and step back away from that. I also think there's a bigger item here that is at play for our entire economy, which is, for a year and a half plus, large chunks of our entire nation's workforce have gotten very comfortable being able to work from home. And that's something that there's a great awakening. We've been watching this in fintech and tech and development, and it applies to every other industry as well as city government, which is there's a moment where maybe after Labor Day, as we see a lot of these companies coming back, where we're going to see who exactly is coming back and who's going to use COVID, use vaccines or masks or any other reason to say, I'm not coming back. And there's a lot of people that believe that's going to be a large number of folks.
Well, we
don't have the option with a lot of our city departments to let people work from home. You can't pick up garbage from home. You can't put out fires or respond to crime from home. And so we've got folks who have to be out in the field, who have to be interfacing with folks in our community. And we need to make sure that they are, and the people they interact with are, as protected as possible.
But Larken, to that, if essentially the city realistically just wants everyone to get vaccinated, as does the county, why not just mandate the vaccine?
Well, I don't think I could say for sure that we are not going to get to that point, but I think we would always rather use a carrot than a stick. We'd always rather have it be something that's positive that leads people to get that, instead of something that they might view as negative.
Would you support a vaccine mandate?
If we get to the point where that's the only thing we can do that we believe protects our workforce and the people that they interact with, it's certainly something I'd have to consider. Right now, I do prefer that we try to find a way to incentivize it.
Tariq, what about you?
Let me tell you something right now. This is 100% step number one, and step number two is coming, which is the mandate. There's no doubt in my mind, knowing how the city operates. Step one is the carrot, step two is the stick. It is coming. That decision will have to be made. And I don't think they have contemplated how complex of a decision that is. That's going on in all of our Fortune 100 companies right now, that same sticky situation. And I mean, all right, so where do you draw the line? Previous cancer patients who have deficient immune systems, well, are you going to require them, or can they work from home? This is a very slippery slope, of which a new normal, right, in this world isn't going to dictate we're going to have one season of solving it. We have to have a sustainable solution for the long term that people can both contemplate the safety of those around them, but also their own personal choice and what risks they're willing to take.
Sure, and likely, like there is religious exemptions, there could also be those other types of health exemptions as well. But guys, I got to wrap it up here, at least for this break. Stay with us. More with Councilman Bokhari and Egleston on the other side of this commercial break. Welcome back. It was years in the making, but Charlotte's Gold Line streetcar is finally open for business. It is set to be a game changer for people in Charlotte's west side. The Gold Line runs from Beatty'sford Road through Uptown all the way to Elizabeth. Larken, I know if this was a real thorn for those in your district, but are people actually going to ride it from east to west?
I think they are. I was out yesterday on a couple of occasions at it, seeing who was on it, seeing what people were using it for. I got a chance to ride it last night after dinner over to near the Johnson C. Smith campus to the new Rita's Italian Ice over there to get a little frozen treat. And there were people on it at all times of day. There were folks who had ridden it, students who'd ridden it from Johnson C. Smith into Uptown just to grab coffee and just to check it out. And people were impressed with how nice and new and clean and quiet the cars are compared to the old replica trolleys that we used to have out there. So I think people will use it. It is fare free through the end of this calendar year. So I would highly encourage people to get out there and test it themselves and see what they think. But it's going to be a great way to get to football games that we got coming up this fall. A great way to get to soccer matches and baseball games. So a lot easier and a lot cheaper than having to park in Uptown. And I hope people will utilize it. But I know they're excited that we've mostly gotten to the end of the tunnel here on the construction piece.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it is free for the rest of this year, but then there will be a fare. I have seen countless people jump on the blue line north to south for free, basically. They don't pay for it. So, Tariq, do you think people are actually going to pay for it, and how is the city going to enforce that payment?
Well, I mean, probably not, maybe somewhat. I think it's kind of irrelevant because of this broader point, which is we need to start pitching these transformational projects for what they are. And look no further than South End. I was here in the early stages of all of that. Larken was as well. I remember it. This was pitched as a transformational transportation solution. And all you have to do is walk over to South End to see that it's transformational, but not from a moving people perspective. It's from all the development that occurred around it. This is an economic development tool. And what will happen and what has already happened along this line that we've already seen now to date, but even more so over the next year, is going to be amazing. But what we must start doing is calling a spade. And when we start calling something an economic development solution, we start weighing it amongst other economic development solutions. We start measuring it as such. But as long as we start pretending these are transportation solutions, those get in the way of us talking about real 20 and 30-year transportation solution needs like 5G and autonomous vehicles and tunneling and all the other things that are actually potentially going to move people on the ground, under the ground, and in the air. It's certainly not this, although the economic development impacts are indeed, undeniable.
I think it's both. And it's certainly an economic development tool. We've seen what that's done on the blue line. We've already seen some of that's done with the gold line even before it opened. And it's not a transportation solution in that it is going to somehow cure traffic congestion when people are coming back into the office in Uptown, but it is a transportation solution for any individual who chooses to use it, who can walk to a station, get on and ride in on the light rail or the streetcar or any of these transportation modes that we've created. It gives them a better way to get around. So it is a transportation solution for the people who choose to use it.
I do have to move on to another very important thing for many people here in the city of Charlotte. Now that city leaders have approved the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan, all eyes are now on the Unified Development Ordinance, otherwise known as the UDO. So what exactly is that? Simply put, the UDO is a set of regulations designed to guide our city's future development. This UDO will guide growth to bring to life the vision of the 2040 plan's policies. That UDO also builds from other city policies, including the Transportation Action Plan and the Strategic Mobility Plan, which the city just held listening sessions for. here. I know I just said a lot there. It can get really nitty and gritty, but this is super important. Why is it so important to everybody, regardless if you live in a neighborhood or even if you have a business here in town? Larken?
Well, it's important because it's going to shape the way that our city grows for the next several decades. And so it will codify the vision that we set forward in the comprehensive plan. But it's also got to do a better job than we've done historically of making sure that we don't have one plan that says one thing and another that contradicts it. And oftentimes that's what we run into. And so we've got to make something that builds the city we want to live in, but also makes it clear for the people who are helping us build it exactly what they're supposed to be doing and where and when. And so that's going to involve a lot of community input in terms of determining place types in certain parts of our city, where we want industrial, where we want office, where we want mixed use, which is going to be a much more predominant thing than we've been accustomed to, where we used to have all of our uses separated. Now we like to see a lot of them together. So this is going to be the document that guides the way we head as a city. And so it is critically important that people get engaged.
Tariq, you were critical. I think it's fair to say you were skeptical of how we got to this point when we were talking about the 2040 plan. What are your expectations going forward now that we are really getting into what matters here?
Well, I mean, my expectations are low, unfortunately, because I saw exactly what the writing on the wall was for our last 8+ months of battle on this, which was we had a planning director and certain forces that wanted to have what rightly should have been the UDO discussion, which we're entering at a more strategic vision level, aspirational level of the comp plan that said, hey, while we have an aspiration to do X and Y, very specifically, we're going to do things like abolish single family zoning. And we're going to use community benefit agreements to do things that have never been done before, nor do we know how to do them. So unfortunately, instead of going and looking at the impacts to affordable housing in an economic impact analysis and then bringing forth that tactically inside the UDO discussion, which is coming up, they've already done it. And when we raise the 5 of us district reps that were against those very things, when we raise those concerns again, I guarantee you they're going to put the Heisman hand up and say, well, we've already litigated that with you. We won that conversation. Move on. And that's exactly what's going to happen. So the only thing I know how to do at this point is not let them do the other thing they did to us, which was take data points and craft certain things they liked the way they looked and feed that to us like we're mushrooms in the dark, essentially. So I'm going to make sure that we fight to say, here are the metrics for community engagement, which include the development community, include neighborhood organizations that were highly critical of this. And here's how we're going to measure you, staff, your success and what's happening on the actual engagement front. It's all we can do at this point.
Larken, I see your smirk, but sadly, I got to give Tariq the last word there. We are out of time. Thank you both gentlemen for joining us here. More Flashpoint coming up on the other side of this break.